When Lucius Cornelius Sulla entered Rome at the end of the 82 BC year, what was left of Rome's butchered Senate voted him Dictator legibus faciendis a re publici constituendae causa, or dictator for the making of laws and settling of the constitution. The office of dictator, unlike a senatus consultum ultimum for the consul, allowed its office holder a limited form of unlimited military and governmental powers. This emergency office was created in order to break through the slow, political drudgery of debates and opposing views during an imminent threat. This threat usually came in the form of an invading army. The dictator's very word was law. He removed or appointed officers, executed or spared enemies, followed or sidestepped Rome's laws. And when he was no longer dictator, he could not be prosecuted for any decision he had made while in office. Traditionally, the office was granted by the Senate for a fixed period of 6 months. At the end of the allotted time, if the threat was not resolved, the Senate voted on whether or not to grant an additional 6-month term. Upon resolving the threat, the office holder, in emulation of the great dictator, Cincinnatus, was expected to lay down his office and return to private life, or to the government office he previously held. Sulla's dictatorship, however, differed from every other dictator elected in Rome's long history. Sulla accepted the office in order to rid Rome of enemies, not foreign, but from within her own government. Neither was the length of Sulla's dictatorship fixed at 6 months, requiring a fresh vote by the Senate in order to continue. Sulla's dictatorship would last for as long as Sulla deemed necessary. By ratifying Sulla as dictator without a time limit, Rome had just given her autonomy over to one man who, himself, would decide when, or if, it should be given back. But Sulla knew the work that needed to be accomplished could not be done within 6 months. As dictator, his intention was to restructure Rome's constitutional republic, so that reformists and populists like the Gracchi, Gaius Marius, Saturninus, Glaucia, Rufus, Carbo, Cinna, and Marius the Younger, could never again use the support of the ignorant masses to steal Rome's government. To Sulla, a people blind enough to worship an old, frail, and murderously ambitious man like Gaius Marius, only proved that such people did not deserve a say in matters as important as the governing of Rome's mighty empire. Such people would always pick the most popular candidate. And the candidate would earn his popularity by always promising them rewards for which someone else had to pay. The people would always rally behind those who promised them free grain, free land, and a cancellation of debts, but they would never question from whose pockets those handouts came. The day after Sulla's victory over the Colline Gate, many of the Samnite and Marian commanders who had fled, were caught and executed. Sulla ordered their heads cut off and mounted on spikes. He then commanded his legions to march the decapitated heads of the Marians to the town of Praeneste, where Marius the Younger cowered behind fortified walls. The citizens of Praeneste, who were completely cut off from trade, foraging, or water, began to support Marius the Younger less and less. The longer the siege endured, the more Marius the Younger felt the sideways glances of the people who knew, but for him, they would not be starving. Knowing his safety was quickly deteriorating, Marius began work on an underground tunnel, through which he and his men hoped to bypass the siege, and make their escape. When Sulla's legions paraded their trophies of spiked heads around Praeneste, the city formally surrendered. Marius and his men tried to make a hurried escape through the unfinished tunnels, but were discovered. With no option left, Marius the Younger, realizing at last that he was not his father, took his own life. When Sulla arrived at Praeneste to accept the town's surrender, he divided the prisoners into 3 groups: Italians, Romans, and Praenestrians. The Praenestrians and Italians, Sulla had executed. The Romans, he pardoned, but only after confirming they deserved death. With the death of Marius the Younger, what remained of the Marian party took flight. Knowing they would attempt to regroup, Sulla approached the young man whose unsolicited conscription of 3 legions had played no small part in his victory. Pompeius was not a general, yet he commanded legions. He was not a senator, yet Sulla had made him a lieutenant. And with so many of the older generation of optimates having fallen to the purges of Marius and his son, Sulla knew it was to the younger generation he must turn if he hoped to carry his constitutional changes any further than his own death. Sulla needed Pompeius, and he needed Pompeius's legions. In order to bind Pompeius to him, Sulla offered the young man the one thing his status as a new man, with no political office, would deny him: a patrician bride of the highest caliber. As the daughter of Rome's former House Speaker, and now Sulla's stepdaughter, Aemilia Scora was the perfect choice. Although she was pregnant by her first husband, whom Sulla made her divorce, Pompeius jumped at the chance for such a prestigious bride. Divorcing his own wife, Antistia, he married Aemilia right away. Next, Sulla offered his new son-in-law a special command to chase down the Marian refugees, who were making their way towards Sicily, Hispania, and Africa. Along with this special command, Sulla gave Pompeius additional troops, as well as a fleet of ships. As dictator, the first thing Sulla did, once formally established in the office, was begin his own purge of the city's liberal element. Rather than repeating the bloodbaths launched by Gaius Marius and Marius the Younger, Sulla drew up lists of names. These lists, which were called prescriptions, were posted outside the Senate House. Anyone whose name appeared on one of Sulla's lists were legally deemed, by order of the dictator, an enemy of the state. He was to be immediately brought in, killed, or informed on. All his properties would be confiscated by the state, leaving the remainder of his family homeless. To incentivize the people, Sulla offered a percentage of these prescribed people's properties as a reward to anyone directly responsible for their death or capture. Such incentives attracted to Sulla the lowest type of people. Fortune hunters, who were willing to turn on their own family members for increased wealth, became Sulla's henchmen. Before long, these spies whispered names of their own into the dictator's ear, and thereby created their own base of power. They added the names of any with whom they thought to settle old scores, or those who owned lavish properties which they coveted. Sulla's spies could also be relied upon to even erase names from Sulla's proscription lists, if the families of the proscribed offered more than they could make by turning them in. Soon, Sulla's spies dominated Rome. No one knew who was or was not an informer. And so, out of fear, the Roman people quickly distanced themselves from one another. Through carefully chosen topics of conversation, people took care not to say anything which might offend their neighbors, or be construed to fit a false accusation. Those with great works of art began selling them off so their personal wealth, which they once proudly displayed, would not attract covetous desires. So they would not be accused of helping the Marian party. Many turned a blind eye to the homeless women and children of the proscribed, who were forced to prostitute themselves, and beg in the streets. From mere conversations to personal interactions, an atmosphere of mistrust and apprehension, even within one's family, overshadowed every aspect of Roman life during the 81 BC year.